All right, everybody, it's time for another project. It's not an outdoor project, even though you're seeing me outside. It's a gorgeous day. So it's good to kind of work in the garage and not have to worry about extreme heat. So I'm going to tell you about brake, caliper, and rotor replacement on this white car here. Let me turn this around and tell you a little more. Okay, I have a friend that is having problems with one of the brakes locking up. They're driving fine, and then all of a sudden the wheel starts locking up, and it's the right front wheel. And so I've pulled the wheel when it was at their place. This is a 2015, and I pulled the wheel, and there's not a lot of rust. So it's a 10-year-old car, but I said, all right, do I want to work on this, or do I want to have them take it to the shop? One of the things that was, again, sticker shock, he was going to take it to, this is a Genesis, so he was going to take it to a Genesis dealer. I think this was a Genesis before it was its own brand. It's a 2015 Hyundai Genesis, a 3.8 liter, for reference. And so he took it, and they said, okay, yeah, we can change the calipers and the brakes and the rotors, and I think it was close to like $5,000. And so I said, all right, let's take a wheel off, let's see how bad it is. I just want to see what I'm in for, if it's going to be a job too big. I don't have a lot of torches and things to heat, and I don't want to snap bolts and tap and die things. And so I said, all right, it looks really good. It was pretty much garage kept. It's 10 years old, but it's in good shape. So what I'm going to do is jack it up and start taking the wheels off and looking at the rotors, make sure that we have the right replacement parts we're going to get. Couple of tools here that just to get started. That you can see that this is a really low profile car. So while I have some jacks there, even the jacks would be hard pressed to get under there. And underneath there is a lot of kind of plastic shrouding. So it's hard to tell even where the cross beam is. So I'm going to use the jack that came with the car, jack it up enough to be able to get under there and see things, to be able to take some of the plastic covers off and get my jacks in there. And then once I get the jacks, I've got 3 different jacks. I've got one in here that's a 2-ton. I think it's a 1.5 ton. I got a scissor jack. But once I basically get it up in the air to where both wheels are off the ground, then I'll put it on jack stands. So I'm not going to go through a lot of the basic stuff. I'm going to assume you know how to jack up a car safely, follow the manufacturer's suggestions, especially in this case, where you can see the best place for you to put a jack is right here. There is a metal tab, and the jack, the way the jack is, it's kind of got like a U shape that goes up in here. So this is nice, sturdy metal here and on the other side. Whereas if you just take a jack here, there's this plastic covering here that you could easily crack. So that's where I want to at least get it up off the ground, take some of that plastic stuff that you can see under there, and then see where I can better position my jack to really raise it up. And then we'll go from there. So the goal again, replace calipers, rotors, and brakes. Okay, let me expand a little bit. I now have the jack that came with it. You can see that, let me show you this too. This is one of my new favorite tools, and it's just a light. It's a headband. I'm not using it as a headband, but as a switch on the side, and it really gives a lot of light. So we'll use that as I'm filming. So you can see here the jack, manufacturer's jack. It's not real fun to use, but you see how it kind of straddles this tab that's sticking down. And it's actually grabbing the 2 pieces of metal, I think, for the most part, or maybe the backside. Yeah, the backside more than the front. The front is not touching. But that's what we're going to raise the car. I almost have the wheel off the ground. It's barely touching. Another thing you want to do is crack the lug nuts before you get the tire off, because if they're too tight, then you won't have any leverage. So I use and it's got a locking lug nut, so I have to have a special socket. Make sure you get that. But I always use my go-to breaker bar with an extension. You can really grab on it and get a lot of leverage. So I've cracked all those loose, so that's ready to kind of come off. But I wanted to show you before I go any further. I've got wheel chocks and some pieces of wood in the back on both sides because I'm going to be lifting both sides. But now I have a little bit more clearance underneath. And if we go to the front of the car, you can kind of see this whole plastic shroud where, you know, normally right about here where these two join is going to be that cross beam that I would want to jack up the whole car at once. So now what I at least have is some clearance to be able to get some of these bolts off. And some you'll see are looks like maybe a 10mm bolt. Some are more of those clips that you can pry off, and some are missing that I could see. You know, here's one that's not missing. Another looks like a screw, but a pry at the same time. But we'll basically take this whole front shield off here so I can see what I'm doing and be able to get my jack under there. And you can see it's been hit a few times. But all in all, for a 10-year-old car, this is really intact. That'll help dampen noise. That'll help dirt and debris from getting up in your engine compartment. So that's the next task, is take this shroud off and then see where I have some more lifting points. Here's another little trick or something to make it easy. You can always get these clips off with screwdrivers and that sort of thing. We end up gouging your fingers, and you lose one, you break one, and you got to go find a specific one. I just bought like this multi-use kit. Has a whole bunch of different sizes, has a bunch of different pullers, especially this nice metal one where you can really get under it and pry it up on both sides. And then hopefully you're not losing as many. Some plastics ones as well. So, I mean, this kit was maybe like $10 or something. It's well worth it, even if you're not a mechanic. I'm certainly not doing this stuff every weekend. But when I change my oil and have to replace my oil filter, my Toyota Highlander, I end up having to take some shroud off. And so I'm constantly taking these clips on and off. So it's better to have something like this. Okay, I want to show you this. I got the shroud off. This is the underside of it. And the one I showed that's a Phillips, it's still a spring clip, but it's an interesting one. I haven't quite seen these before, where you screw it in and it'll expand the top part. So I also, when I was under there, you can see these are kind of rusty, and there were some that are missing. So you can see this one's still attached. There was one there, but there was one missing there. So it'll certainly help. And there was even a twisty tie in one of them. So having those spring clips is going to be good to maybe replace some of these that aren't working as well. But we'll worry about that later. And now what I'll show you underneath the car, now that we have some space to see, put my light on here. Okay, so this is the underside now. You don't have a shroud here. And here's another shroud that you can see. But here's this cross beam that I was wanting to look at. So it's a good idea now that I'm under here. You could just see this divot here, and I can put a block of wood this way underneath my jack, and I can jack the whole thing up from the middle. And then you can also see that on these ends or anywhere along here, I can follow that same line and put my jack stands there. So that'll give us the most support for the car while I'm doing stuff on the wheels. So that's what's next, jack it up from the middle. Okay, so here's what I like to see. I jacked it up with this block of wood, got it up nice and high, and I put my jack stands on both sides of it, lowered it down so it's resting on the jack stands. But I kind of leave the hydraulic jack right there. It's not in my way. I have both wheels off the ground with plenty of room to work on it. And I'm set up now to start taking wheels off and looking at things. And I'll just leave it like this. What you don't want to do is leave it on hydraulic jack, because the hydraulic fluid can bleed a little bit and it could start lowering. Plus, it just makes it a lot less steady when you're, beating on rotors and things like that to try to make sure you got enough space to work on things. Okay, I got both wheels off. You can see on the rotor here, there are 3 Phillips heads screws that are holding the rotor in. Before I do anything, I like to lubricate everything I'm going to take off. So either, your PB blaster, your liquid wrench, your WD-40, whatever you choose to use. So this is the hose that I'm going to take off, or the clamp that I'm going to take off that's holding the brake hose on. That'll allow the caliper to fall down. On the back, hopefully you can see this wide enough. There are 2 big bolts, or 17 millimeter bolts. I've hit those with some WD-40 as well. And then also this whole bracket here. I'm not quite sure how this works yet. I just see the cotter pins, and pins will pull out, but I think those brackets are just helping that the brake pads stay in, or press on them to keep them in place. But I sprayed all those too. I'm assuming those are going to have to come off. And so once I take all that stuff off and release this cable holder here, or the hose holder, then I can set the caliper on the ground, take the rotor off, and start looking at things on both sides. But first, let the liquid penetrator do its job. So let that sit for a couple hours before you try to crack anything loose. Okay, it hasn't been a significant amount of time, but since these Phillips screws are in such good shape, I wanted to try to take them out. Now what I started with, which this is a nice Milwaukee, but I believe this is a pH2 tip. If you didn't know, Phillips has, pH1, pH2, pH3, and they get fatter and stubbier, and, so more of a fine. So my suggestion is get as fat as you can to fit in here. This is a pH3. I started with the pH2, and I was just doing it by hand, and it wasn't going to come. And I started tearing that out a little bit, because again, it's a pointier one. So you want the chubbier pH3 for this particular one. And this is an impact driver. So if you're pushing hard on it and pulling the trigger, it will act like an impact wrench, and it'll kind of like a hammer drill thing. And so that helps. You can also get like a manual screwdriver that you can hit the end, and it'll ratchet it either counterclockwise or clockwise as well. So you can have a manual one, and you probably get one for like $20. But if you have a hammer drill or an impact driver, then that will work as well. You just have to make sure you're pushing hard, and then it'll come out. So I've actually done all of these already. Just wanted to show you, how long they are. They're not that long. And these are coming out very nicely now. I think I'm still going to see if I can get replacement ones, if it's easy enough. I could use them again, but I'd rather get new ones in case you have to take it off again, just so you're not stripping the threads. But like I said, they're in good shape. Okay, so those are out. But of course, you can't take the rotor off because the caliper's still on. So next, we need to come over to this caliper hose clamp and the caliper itself. So the hose clamp here, you can see there's a bolt holding the hose right there. This is a 10 millimeter. And I have an assortment of different lengths of ratchets. And I think it's a good idea to always make sure it's going the right way. So when it's clicking, you can see, well, it's hard to show you when I'm holding the camera, but basically when you're counterclockwise, it's moving it, and when you're going clockwise, it's clicking, meaning it's not doing anything. So that way, no matter what orientation you have this in, it's set right. So put that on there. I've got a nice handle length away with this extension instead of being smack up against it. And then you can take this off. And once you crack it loose, it's pretty easy. And then you can pretty much do it by hand. So again, you don't want to confuse all the different bolts and screws and washers you want to keep together. There's a lock washer and a washer on this clamp. So you want to just keep that all together, you know, put it down in the order you're taking things out. And so now this should be coming free. And there it is. So there's just a little tab on there that holds it in place. So once you get that free, you're good to go. So now this is loose. Now we have to come back. The harder part is now going to be this big bolt right here, and then one down below. And those are 17 millimeter. I don't know why I'm getting an artifact there, but 17 millimeter, and we're going to crack those loose. I'll try to do that on video. That might be a little difficult, but we'll try it. Okay, so I have my camera bouncing on my top of my light. And I'll try to adjust it a little bit so you can see kind of both. So here's the bottom bolt, and the top bolt is just out of view. There, that's about as close as I can get. All right, I already have the socket on the top one, and you can see that I've got, hopefully you can see, take it off. Here's my handle, and you want to get leverage so you can have it like this and just kind of hit down on it. Sometimes you might need a hammer too. I'm going to grab my rubber mallet to break it loose. Wow, I might need my breaker bar here to get more leverage. So that'll change my angle a little bit. Well, not too worried about this. Hose, it's not really in the way, but I would like to get a little bit more leverage on this. I think that might have done it. Switch back to the socket. A little less leverage, a little more room. I can feel it moving. There we go. All right, so that one's free. Let's see how bad the bottom one is now. Again, the liquid lubricant always helps this stuff. All right, let's try the breaker bar again. All right, looks like we needed the breaker bar for both of those to break them loose. All right, but now we are loose. Again, these might have Loctite on them. You might have lock washers. But it's a good sign that they kind of free up after you break them loose, because if they're tight the whole way, likelihood is you're going to snap one. So Hopefully you could see something as I was recording. And other than these being just a little bit gummy, they're turning by hand. This one is anyway. Nice long bolts. So you can see, and it's just a regular washer. It's hard to tell if there's Loctite on there or not. And it's not likely that this caliper is just going to fall off because, you know, the brakes being on and off, even though the pressure is released, there should be enough friction. Okay, there's the other one. You always want to check, these are both exactly the same length, but you want to check that just in case. And one last thing I think I'll do, there's a block of wood here. As I pull this caliper off, I want to make sure that it's not hanging by that hose. Okay, now hopefully you can see, get the light out of your eye. You can see I've got the caliper on the ground now. The rotor will be free to come off. Probably have to beat it off. But you can see that there wasn't much. You can see that there wasn't much from a damage perspective. This isn't the side that was sticking. But you can see the brake pads in there. There's some little score markings here and there. But overall, they're not too bad. And they're not down to the wear indicator where it would be screeching. So one of the things you want to do is position this when we get ready to do the next one. We're going to take this nut off here, this bolt, and we're going to try to quickly transfer it to the new one so you don't lose a lot of brake fluid. That way there's less to bleed when you're done later. All right, now it's time to work on getting this off. And basically I'm going to spin this around and kind of hammer. There's an open space back here where the caliper was. I'm going to hammer the back of it with a nice rubber mallet, and just take your time. You can spray some lubricant around the hub here to make sure that you can get that off, and just take your time and work at it slow. Don't overemphasize how much you're hitting it, because you don't have a lot of swinging capacity anyway. Okay, I have to share something. I normally get these rotors off by taking a rubber mallet and whacking away at the side here as I spin it around. That wasn't working. I was even laying down getting full swings from under here, and then I used a regular hammer here, and everything was just too tight. So shout out to somebody else on YouTube that has a nice method of doing that. And basically what you do is you use the caliper bolts and the holes for the calipers, and you use a bolt and a nut. Take this out. This was basically a spacer because I didn't have a bolt and a nut with enough threads. But you basically use a nut on this side with your threads, and a wrench. Of course, it doesn't want to cooperate and get on there. Right, because I'm using the wrong. No, it's the right side. 9/16 doesn't. There. So 9/16 on this side to hold it, and then you basically turn this end over here and you use it to pry up against the rotor. And the reason that, let me move that out. So basically you're going to pry up against this with this nut all the way back here, and you can keep pushing, and that gives you the leverage. You could use a crowbar here. One of the things that I kind of liked about this bolt was it didn't have threads all through it, because this is where the threads go for the bolt holding the caliper on. So you don't want to damage the inside threads. But this certainly, you're basically prying between the nut and here, and you can spin a couple times, do it like 3 times, and then this basically popped off. You can see here that it's already off here, and the top, it's just basically hanging there on the bolts now. So this will come right off. That was a lot easier than trying to whale on it with a hammer, especially if your jacks aren't as sturdy as mine and they're a little more precarious. You'd better off prying with a wrench and a bolt or a socket wrench and a bolt than you are beating on it with a hammer. So that worked much better. So it's certainly something that I learned, and I will continue in the future. I was thinking about, trying to get some kind of a gear puller, to have a triangular bar across there and push against the center hub. You could try a gear puller that's, grabbing the edges and into the center. But that was certainly a lot simpler. It's just to get, and mine was like a 3/8 bolt with a 3/8 nut on the end, so you can go through the holes where the caliper mounts. Careful not to mangle those threads, and pry it off with ease. Okay, here's the rotor off, and I want to correct myself because these don't have internal threads. This is just a pass-through, and the threads are in the caliper itself. So when that bolt goes through the back here, this is just kind of like a really fat washer, and you're grabbing the caliper and pulling it against the washer. So there is no real danger trying to pry the rotor off through this hole, because there are no threads in there. And you can see kind of how dirty. I'll clean this up before I put the rotor on, and you can see the edges where it was sitting. You can clean that all up, and then the new rotor will go on a lot easier. You can either throw some white lithium grease there or some Never Seas to kind of clean that up in case you need to take things off in the future. But this side is done, short of getting new parts and taking the brake pads off of here. Actually, I don't even need to take the brake pads off of here because I'm not going to use them again. Just going to get a whole new caliper with brake pads. I think they might already be mounted to them. And time to do the other side, then we'll be done. All right, I decided on this side to leave the caliper in place, to take this plate off. And this plate, I don't even know why you need it, other than maybe this pin only goes through here and doesn't go through another hole here. No, there's even a little hole here. So I think this is kind of useless. But they basically have a plate mounted here so that you could make sure that those pads don't come out. Maybe it gives the caliper more structural stability too. I'm not going to question designers, but on this side, I decided to take those 6 bolts off and unscrew it, and then take these pins out. And I forgot to kind of comment on this before on the other side, but I kind of thought of a way, these are rusted, they're pretty nasty. But what I decided to do, again, just taking long nose pliers, and when it's over here, you're going to have to grip this a little bit. But once you grip it, you can push it out, and then you can grab it on this side, and you've got a little bit of a head there, and then that'll take it right out as well. So now that's an easy way of taking the pins out. And I should get new pins on the next set of brakes and we're trying to order a caliper, and it says it's loaded, so it should be loaded with brakes, and so we shouldn't really have to do anything. So now that we have, I just bumped my camera mount. Now that we have that out of the way, this was the one that was giving us problems. So it's possible that we are going to have to fight these. Oh, but not really. So you've got the brake hardware is a bracket here and here that kind of slides in and has two like legs that go in there. And then these brake pads will slide along them. So you can see this one's starting to come out. I should have got a better screwdriver or something. There it's coming. Just not at a good angle. All right, here's a moment of truth. Look at that. So you can see how bad that brake pad is. There's absolutely nothing here. And you can look on the rotor itself, you can see the scoring. And almost looks like the rings of Saturn or something. And so that's why we need to replace both rotors, because of this one, and it's been locking up. So I'll have to show you what things look like when I get these pads out, and then we can take a look at the piston once we get the caliper off. But remember, on this side we have to loosen up those. Wow, this is even worse, this back side. So I'm afraid to look at what the rotor looks like on the back side. But look at that. There's nothing left. That's metal. Metal on metal, and that's going to heat up your rotor quick and make things kind of get red hot and freeze. And that's why this was locking up. So certainly is good that we got it in the garage and we're changing it. And so now I'm going to take off this. I think we're just kind of out of range here. But this bolt that's holding here, right there, we're going to take that off, give us some slack, and then take those two 17 millimeter bolts off of the caliper, and we'll be able to remove that. And then we can work on getting the rotor off, and I'll try to show you real time what that looks like, since I have something I can mount my camera to here. Okay, we're going to try to show you real time here. Got my camera rigged up there, so hopefully you can see. And first, might be off camera. So we're going to take this bolt off and this bolt off. But first, I have to get this line out of the way, and that's that one on the side of the knuckle, which is a 10 millimeter. And the socket shoulder is kind of in the way, but I want a little bit more of a standoff so I can use the extension. And that was easy. So again, this is that little flange that has a little tab on it so that it sits in the knuckle good. Make sure I don't lose that screw. Now, instead of even trying the socket here, I'm going to go with the big long breaker bar. This is probably about 20 inches long with the 17 millimeter socket on the end. So we can try to get these bolts loose. And again, this will just be in the way a little bit. Get my leverage here. I think that, yeah, it freed it up enough. I think I'll just break this other one loose before I try to use the socket. There. I had some leverage on that one that I could get on it. Using against my leg. Got that freed up. Okay. Now we're back to our ratchet wrench. And these are fairly long. Remember I talked on the other side about just going through a pass-through on the knuckle. So these bolts have to be threaded fairly long to get through that slot and then go into the caliper. Now this time, the caliper may be a lot looser because of the fact that there's no brakes holding it. I pulled the brake pads out. You can see it's already getting wobbly. Or hopefully you can see it on camera. So I've got to get something to set this on it so it doesn't hit the floor. So let's grab, since I'm in the garage, we got all kind of containers here. Set this down on it. Once we get this off, we can set it right on that tub. Hopefully the wife didn't want that tub for something specific. And if you can see on camera, you see once it gets loose enough, I just use the end of the ratchet wrench to unscrew it. It's a lot easier than grabbing that dirty bolt. Actually, I'll put it on the bottom, just in case she wants to use it, I can wipe it off. Same thing down here, I can, once we get it. And it's probably a little tighter because the weight of the caliper. So yeah, when you take the weight of the caliper off, then it's no weight on that bolt. So you can see, hopefully on camera, the length of those threads. Pretty long. Take the top one off. And our hose is already disconnected from the knuckle. So here we go. And we can have that there. So now, what we're going to do is take a look at this. And I see the problem now. You take my camera off my mount here and give you a close-up as to what's going on with the caliper here. And this is a pretty nice caliper because a lot of calipers, in the olden days anyway, and I'm old, they would have one piston. And you'd have, just one side, one big piston, and over here is the just piece of metal. And you would just have metal here and a piston here, and basically squeezes everything together and your rotor's in between it. Now, if you'd look at this one, we actually have 4 pistons here. And one of the things we see on this, if I turn it around, you can see a bleeder port there and a bleeder port there. So there's actually hydraulic fluid going on both sides of this. So there has to be a channel taking it from one side to the other. But if you look at that piston now on the far side, trying to get in close with the light and still have some control over the camera. But you can see that this is completely melted, and there's not even a rubber, there's supposed to be a rubber boot here, and instead this is just completely gone. So you can see that a lot of debris could get in there, and then it can't go in and out smooth because there's debris. There's no integrity in that boot keeping dirt or rust or anything else out. The other side doesn't look too bad. You can see the rubber boot here. There's a lot of integrity there, and it's still kind of supple. You can still move it. Whereas this, there is no rubber there. So this is definitely the culprit. That's what's causing everything to stick and lock up and heat up everything. And I don't know if you saw the back of the rotor when I had the camera there or not, but hopefully that'll show you the rotor. And now we're going to work to get that out. And to do that, we're going to use this hole right here, like we did on the other side. Again, I saw this from somebody else on YouTube. There's no danger of anything there. There's no threads in that. And we're going to put the nut on this side. And so you're pushing against that and pushing against the rotor to kind of pry it off. And so as and I don't have enough thread, so I'm going to do the same thing I did before, is I'm going to have a spacer here. And I don't have it in front of me, but I'm going to have a spacer there, and then I'll have a piece of wood with a piece of metal, just so I can crank on that and make sure that I can push against this. And you'll hear it on this side. If you're watching, you'll be able to see this hub and the space here get smaller. So you can see this is about a 1/2 inch. And after you hear it kind of creak, it'll pop this out a little bit, and then we'll spin it, and then we'll do it again. We'll do it a couple times as we spin this, and that'll pop the rotor right off, just from the force of driving that screw and that nut on through this hole here, because we're using this as our leverage, and we're driving with a socket wrench here and holding it up against here with an open end wrench. So I'll see if I can get that on camera. I'm not sure though. Okay, hopefully this is recording. And the problem is I can't tell if it's recording or not. But so now what we're going to do, we got a piece of wood here just to take up space. And we've got a piece of metal, because when I first tried this, of course, just with wood is not as strong as, let's see, need 9/16. It's a 3/8 bolt, so I need a 9/16 socket on my ratchet, and I need a 9/16 open end wrench. So basically I'm going to keep this tight against here, and I just have to hold that. And what we're going to do is we're going to drive this. We got to tighten, not loosen. It was set to take bolts off. And now we're just going to crank on this, and hopefully you'll hear, I'll quit talking, you'll hear an audible click from this coming off or moving. There you go. All right, so it's kind of scary because it's loud. And then we can just back this off. You might drop your little spacer. Again, if you have a longer bolt, you don't have to deal with all this other stuff. You can just go up against the rotor. But now you can take this off. We can spin the rotor. Try to do it on the other half, because then that will be a lot easier to try to get it all at once. And now it's too far in. I can't get my spacer there. There we go. So our spacer's in. Open end wrench is in. Make this go tighter again. You could hear it right away. Doing a little something. There. You could kind of see the rotor shift. Hopefully you saw a little bit of movement there. And now I can just kind of take this out, and our rotor's loose. So there we go. Our rotor's off. Now we just need to make sure we're ordering the right parts. Take your bolts, make sure you don't lose them. And make sure when you're ordering replacement parts that you're matching up the right style of caliper. Look at all the features. You might have model numbers or serial numbers on there. Same thing with the rotor. This particular one has 3 Phillips screws to hold the rotor to the hub. And so you'll want to take note of that. You don't want to buy a rotor that the hole patterns are the wrong pattern, or there's only 2 instead of 3. So there's a lot of things to think about when you're ordering replacement parts. So the hardest part was done. Now we just got to clean things up. It'll be a little tricky switching calipers because of the fluid loss, and we got to bleed the brakes at the end and where those ports I showed you on the caliper to make sure there's no air in the line. But the hardest part's done, getting this all apart and not having to torch something to heat it up or use unhuman force. This wasn't bad at all. So I'm pretty pleased with where we got to in one day. Okay, some time has passed and we did get our parts. So the first thing you want to do is set your parts side by side. So we have here old rotor, new rotor. This one has almost like an electroplated paint on it. So that's really going to help from corrosion. But you can see, you can always just slap this on, make sure that the holes align, but I haven't cleaned that all off yet. So first thing to do is just do a visual check. Is it the same size? Is it the same height? Are the hole patterns the same? That's going to be the most important. So you see that the way I have this here, there's a hole all by itself, a hole all by itself, and the other 3 have where the Phillips is going to hold it to the knuckle. So this is the same way. It's a little harder to see because it's black, but I aligned it the same way. There's those 2 singular holes, and then the other 3 have the countersink hole for the Phillips screw. So that's a good check. So we got the right rotors, so that's good. So let's move on to the calipers. And I haven't disconnected anything yet because we don't want to lose fluid. But there's the old caliper. And you see up at the top, it says Mando. And there's a bleeder valve on the right. Harder to see, but there's a bleeder valve on the back side as well. And it connects from the back side. So if you take the new one, which again, these were, the way we got these are already preloaded with brakes. So we don't even have to do anything. But if you look inside, you can see that there's 2 pistons on each side. We have the 2 bleeder valves at the top and the connection point in the back. So we definitely got the right parts. So we're good to go to continue. So I'll move these aside. I'll clean everything up, and then we'll worry about attaching the rotor, and then we'll put the caliper on and connect. We'll do a fast connect, hopefully, to not lose a lot of fluid, and then we'll have to bleed the brakes. So one of the things I wanted to talk about, from most important step is after you get this all back together, is bleeding the brakes. So what I have here is a piece of clear tubing. It's a 1/4 inch inside diameter, so it'll fit over top of these. I'll show you these when I take these rubber caps off. It'll fit over the bleeder valve, so you're not squirting hydraulic fluid all over the brakes, because you don't want to get anything on the brakes, and that's why you have brake clean. So if you do get anything, you can clean it all off with this brake clean. You're going to need and for this car, 10 millimeter open end and a hose so that it'll bleed down, and you can have like a little jar so it can catch it. And then .4, you can use .3 or .4. One of the things I wanted to show up here, you have to find where is the master cylinder. So in this particular car, it's over here. And it's always hard to tell how much fluid you have. So this is a nice little trick. Throw some light down in there. So here's a master cylinder, and you can see it has a cap. And this is a closed system. So you want to make sure that you keep it closed. So right now, we could add a little bit. Don't need to. You just don't want that, as you're bleeding brakes, you don't want that to go all the way down. And if you look at the top, hopefully you can see that. It basically says use .3 or .4. But I had looked it up before I even looked at the cap. But that's another good confirmation step that you bought the right fluid to put in there, because as you bleed the brakes, this is going to go down and you'll have to refill it, which is why we need more brake fluid. So I'm going to clean up
all the rustiness, and I'm just going to use my drill with like a wire wheel attachment. You can use a regular wire brush. Make sure you're using your goggles and gloves and personal protective equipment so you're not getting pieces of rust in your eye. Okay, I lost my audio, so I'm going to audio dub over top of this. I'm going to clean up the knuckle, the hub, whatever you want to call what's left. And you want to make sure you have personal protective equipment. I have glasses that I like that have readers in them so I can see for some fine detail work if I need to. I certainly have my gloves. You can wear a mask if you want. Tool wise, I'm going to use just a cordless drill with a couple attachments. I've got 2 different types of wire brushes that I can use. You want to try to get in to all the different places where there's a bunch of rust, where you're going to put the rotor back on and the wheel lugs back on. Try to get in around everything that you can. And then certainly, last but not least, you can have just a regular old wire brush. Sometimes that gets in places that you can't with some of the other things. You want to make sure that the threads on the lugs, you're taking a look at those. Don't bang them up too much. You need to screw your wheel lugs back on there. You can try to clean them up as much as you can. You can even throw some brake clean on them. That helps kind of dissolve and get rid of some of the components. You can use air if you want. But the bottom line is you want to clean this up as much as possible so that you can easily get the rotor back on. You have the little screw holes for the 3 Phillips screws that are going to go back in. So you can try to clean those up with the wire brush and the brake clean. And I'm going to put this on a time lapse, or not time, just record faster so you don't have to watch it. But you can see what I do. And as you go around instead of using all different positions of the hub, since I have the other wheel off and jacked up, you can spin this hub. So you'll see me as I'm doing that. And I can spin the hub. That way you're in the same spot doing the same thing. And just take your time with it. Make sure you're protecting your eyes. You don't want a piece of this rust flying off to get in your eyes, and you can have, again, a mask. So I'm going to let this run, and then once it's all cleaned up, we'll be able to put things back together. Okay, now you see I've cleaned everything up, and I'm just kind of checking everything. Make sure that those threads are nice and clean. The backing plate, you saw me taking a look at that. There was extra stuff on that that we kind of scraped off. And you can blow this out and use your brake cleaner, and then you've got all good surfaces to start working on. Pay attention to those holes that those screws are going to go in, and you're going to need 3 different ones. And you can see the hub here has a hole for every one, but we don't need it. We only need 3. So line it up, and if the 3 screws don't fit where they're lined up, then you can rotate a little bit if there's a burr or something inside one of those holes. You can see how loose it fits on now because we took all that rusty debris out, and it's cleaned up really nice. So we'll go ahead and put the screws back in here, and I'll put them in with an impact wrench after I get them kind of set. You can use that Phillips 2 screwdriver just to get them started, but you really want to use that Phillips 3 so you get a nice bite. And that's what I'll use with my compact or my impact wrench or my impact cordless to put those on. And you don't want to put all 3 on at once um, and tighten them. You want to put one on at a time and then tighten it. Also, if you have a stud that doesn't work right or it's just marred, you can always pop it out through the back end and get another wheel stud. And that's kind of what I'm showing here, is that you could hammer it out as long as you have enough space. You spin the rotor or the hub to a point where you can knock that wheel stud out and get a new one and replace it. But all of mine look good on here. Again, if you're taking care and you're not hitting it with wrenches and things like that, you're not going to have a problem with those wheel studs. So now we're going to go ahead and fit this on here and hold it in place with those Phillips screwdrivers. And then once we have the rotor firmly in place, then we can start on the caliper and put that back in together. Sometimes you're going to have to hold this to be able to get those Phillips screws started. And again, you might need to wiggle a little bit, make sure that the threads line up, and then tighten each one until you know that it's setting properly in there before you tighten up all 3 of them. And then once you have all 3 of them kind of fully in, then you can go ahead with your PH3 and use an impact wrench or just a nice big screwdriver so you can get a lot of torque on it, because you don't want these backing out and the rotor falling back out. I think I talked in the past, but you can always put Loctite on these. I don't want to ever not be able to get them out again, so I just make sure they're good and tight. I don't worry about Loctite, but that's certainly, there's a couple different kinds of Loctite you can use if you want to. I don't think it would call for it, and it didn't look like any of the screws had any Loctite on it. So I would prefer not to do that. So you make sure you get them back out again without damaging them. Okay, now that we got the rotor on, let's take a look at the caliper. So here I have the new caliper, and I have the 2 bolts that are going to be used to go through the back side. Remember, they have that big kind of like a built-in washer that the bolt's going to go through, and it's going to screw into the caliper. So what we want to do is make sure that these threads are nice and clean so that they go into the caliper and go all the way in by hand, because you're going to want to make sure you've got a nice solid connection. So you can see I've got one already started in. The other one, you can see kind of a lot of debris. They get rust, and especially when you're taking them out, you get little pieces of debris, dirt, grease, the hydraulic fluid, if it gets a little bit on there, puddles you're going over, you're going to get a lot of debris in these threads. So one of the intermediate steps before you put everything back together, make sure your bolts are nice and cleaned off so that you can fit things together easily and you're not needing excessive force to get it back on. So what you can do is, first you can, take a rag, try to get some debris out. I typically am going to use a wire brush. So here you'll see me using a wire brush here, and trying to get a lot of that stuff out of in between the threads. Again, you want to use your eye protection. You see I have gloves on here. You don't want anything flying around. And I'll go through this a couple times. You can use some of that brake clean on here and try to clean the threads up. The other thing that I end up doing in this particular case too is when I go to fit it together in the caliper, it's still a little tight by hand. You can kind of feel some extra resistance. So what I end up doing is going over, I have a wire wheel grinder, there's one side that's a stone, one side that's a wire wheel, and I take it over there and I hold it up against the wire wheel so I can really get in those threads real well. And that's what I end up doing for really both sides of this install, to make sure these bolts are nice and clean and they go in there and make a good solid connection. Okay, now I've gotten both of the bolts cleaned up and they're going in and out of the threads of the caliper nicely. So now is going to be the time to let's pull these out and let's go ahead and mount the caliper to the hub. So one of the things you potentially could do if you wanted to was put Loctite on these bolts as well as you screw them in through the hub. I'm not going to. I just like to torque things. You can see here these brakes were preloaded, and these are the clips underneath. And when I got it, it was ajar. So make sure that things are set in place. You've got a good space between there for the rotor to go through. And when you look on the other side, you can see, again, as we were taking the bolts off there, the 6 bolts are in place. The pins are in good shape with the little cotter pins that capture that. So the brakes are installed properly. That's one of the things you want to check since it came pre-installed. And what we're going to do now is we're going to put this in place on top of the rotor, making sure you're going slow and that you've got a big enough space between those brake pads to slide the rotor on, or slide it between the rotor. And you're going to watch me struggle here a little bit, mostly because the camera's in my way. But you just have to line up the top hole and the bottom hole and get both of these bolts started. And once you get them both started, you can take your ratchet and start securing them. Again, just like the 3 Phillips head screws for the rotor, put both in place. You don't want to put just the top one in and crank it down and then not be able to adjust it with real fine adjustment, just jostling it around a little bit for the threads to line up properly. So you want to just get the threads started and then work on the bottom side, get those started, and then just kind of drive them both in equal amounts so that you've got a nice tight fit there. I'm going to let you continue watching here. And after we get this in place, we'll go through moving the hydraulic line. You can see the old one in the distance there, still sitting on the box because we haven't transitioned the hydraulic line. I decided I thought it would be better to switch the hydraulic line once the caliper's in place, because you don't have a lot of play when it's on the ground. You could do it, and maybe that would have worked better, but I just chose to do it this way, to mount the caliper first and then switch it. So you're not going to be able to see it great on camera, but you'll see once I crack the bolt loose on the hydraulic fluid. I'll assemble it in the backside, and then I'll show you a picture of the backside in the next video clip. See, I finally got this one started. Now it's a little easier to get the second one started, because now you just really have to pivot it a little bit and jostle it a little bit, and then you can get the other one started. I should probably also talk about torque wrenches here. Every bolt on a car generally has a torque setting that you're supposed to tighten it to, and you can get a torque wrench and measure that. I don't get involved in that unless it's gasket material and you've got a bunch of little screws and things like that. To me, tight is tight, and you want to make sure this isn't going to come out. You also don't want to make it so hard on there that it won't ever come off again. So I'm just going to, when I tighten these up, I'm just going to use the ratchet wrench, and it's probably got about 1 foot of leverage, if that. And this one's a 17 millimeter that you just saw. And I'll start tightening these up, and I'll get them as tight as I can. And you can typically feel when the bolt bottoms out, and you're not going to be able to get any more leverage to push on it. And you don't have to go crazy with the amount of force that you're putting on it. You just want them good and tight so they don't back out on their own. You can see that the threads are fairly long, and you want them to be. You want them to get a good grip on the inside of the caliper. So I'll tighten those up in a minute, but what we're also going to do is, to be able to transition, want to crack this loose, and when you spin this around, you want to make sure that little flange, that's that pressure relief, goes back onto that knuckle in the right way when you take this off and switch it to the new one. So just be kind of conscious of that. I believe this hydraulic line bolt is a 12 millimeter. So we'll use a 12 millimeter to kind of crack that loose. And once I crack the bolt loose, you'll definitely see the hydraulic fluid immediately kind of comes out. What I didn't notice before I took it apart was that there are 2 copper kind of crusher washers behind this bolt, one at the top side and one at the bottom side. So when you're doing something like this, make sure that things aren't falling on the ground and you don't know where they went. So in this particular case, you just have to be, you're going to lose some fluid. Just know that. It's not going to be a perfect switch. And it would be nice if you could open up the bleeder valves on the new one and just kind of have gravity, fill and have them ooze out, but that doesn't ever work either. So we're going to crack the bolt loose on this one, and you'll see it start to seep out a little bit, and then we'll tighten it up again until we get into position. And I'm going to do the rest of the transition from the back side. So you'll have a good view, but you really won't see what I'm doing. So there, I cracked it loose, I've tightened it again. So now I'm going to go underneath and take it off completely. What I wasn't expecting was this bolt has fairly long threads as well. So it took me longer by hand to be able to unscrew this. And, so all the while I'm unscrewing it, I'm losing fluid. and then transitioning it to the new caliper took longer than I thought it was going to, but it still worked out. Okay, now you see me get underneath, and there's plenty of space. Again, I've got it on jack stands. There's plenty of space underneath to lay down under there and get at things. In hindsight, I think what I would have done was maybe use the ratchet wrench longer and just spin the top of the dial so I could have a better grip, because as the hydraulic fluid gets on your fingers, it makes it a little more slippery to get that bolt off. So here we're going to crack it loose again. And you can see I can immediately start moving it, but it was starting to slip a little bit and the threads were longer than I wanted it to be. But it still worked. I thought it was only going to be, 2 or 3 turns and the bolt would come out, which wasn't the case. You can see the copper washer there underneath of the bolt. That broke free. Nothing, no washer left there. So you see I'm dealing with everything in my hand with the bolt. And you have to kind of keep the assembly together and make sure that the washers are going to stay where they're supposed to stay. And you see that I have to kind of manipulate this so that that pressure relief, that strain relief on the hose is going to line up properly. And then I can go ahead and insert it into the caliper and start screwing it back in. And it's going to continue to leak until you get it fairly tight. And that's, again, those copper washers are crushing to make sure that you have sealed it. So after you get done with this step, you're going to want to make sure that you wipe everything off. You don't want to get any of this hydraulic fluid on the brake pads. You see, that was another reason for just having it in the backside. And if anything's going to drip, it's just going to drip straight down. And then after you wipe everything off, you can use some of that brake clean to clean things up. But usually a rag will get majority of the hydraulic fluid out of there. So I've got that in place, and I'll check it again later. I don't want to over tighten this bolt. And then we'll come around to the front and we'll put the bolt back in for that hydraulic relief on the metal there. And then we're pretty much done with installing this. And the next step will be to bleed the brakes. Now we can move the old one out of the way and concentrate on the new caliper installed, making sure that the bolts holding it in place are the right torque. And again, I didn't torque it all the way tight in initially, because the old caliper was kind of in the way. You want to get some leverage to be able to tighten things up. You can see the old one, how it was matted there. There's a plug from the new one. I'll just put in the old one just to try to minimize the amount of liquid that's coming out of there. But you're going to have to dispose of the old calipers. Sometimes you might have a core, and you'd send them back to the manufacturer. But in these particular ones, we did not need to send a core back, so they're just garbage. You have to figure out how you're going to throw them away. All right, now those are the plugs in the front and the back. Those are going to come off to help bleed the brakes, and that's going to be the next step after we get this completely mounted and secured. Okay, I'm going to show you the back side of the caliper now, since you couldn't see it in the other view. Here you see the bottom bolt has a little bit of yellow on it, and that one's tightened, and the top one is tightened too. You can kind of see it here at the end of my pinky, and those are the two main bolts that hold the caliper on. So we've got those torqued enough so that they're not going to come out. Again, you can use Loctite if you want, but you don't really need to. And then you can also see in the middle here, this is where the connection is for the hydraulic fluid. You can see down the bottom, there's a little copper washer, and up above, right underneath the head of the bolt, is another copper washer. So those are the two copper washers that get crimped so that you don't have a leak. Now I've gotten this tightened, but you want to check here after you're done bleeding the brakes. You're going to want to see to make sure that there's nothing leaking out of there, because you might have to try to tighten it a little bit again. And this hose should only fit on one way too. But if it drips, it's going to drip straight down, and you're not going to really get stuff in on the brake pads. Certainly if things squirted up on the brake pads, you're going to need to clean them all off. But it's far enough away that you're not going to really have to worry about that much. All right, now that I've showed you the back side, we've got to get ready now for the bleeding of the brakes, which is the most important step in the process, because remember I said it's a closed system. So you have right now in this system, you have air and hydraulic fluid. So we need to try to take the air out of the hydraulic line. And they have these little rubber tops on the bleeder valves. And the bleeder valves are what you use to bleed out the air so that you only have hydraulic fluid left. So sometimes one of the hard parts is getting these little rubber caps off. You just kind of have to work at it. You could probably get like a little screwdriver under there, or a little forked pry bar like you use on the fasteners that hold body parts together. But see, I finally worked it off here, and this is a fairly typical bleeder valve. That it's a 10 millimeter wrench, and it has a little valve at the top. Put your rubber top aside so you don't lose it, because you don't want dirt and debris getting in there. And then you put your 10 millimeter either open end or box end wrench, and what you'll do is you'll crack this open as you're pressing the brakes, and you'll let air out, and then you tighten it again, and you want to bring all that fluid from the lines all the way through the system until you get clear fluid out, clear hydraulic fluid. You don't want any more air in there. And so the process is, you'll have a partner that'll push the brakes, and you'll be opening and closing this. So you'd have them push it, you open it up, and then you close it again, and then they can take their foot off the brake. And that's pushing the fluid through the system such that you can get all the air out until you can see that it's completely no bubbles. The way I like to do it, I like to use a clear tube so you can see what's going on. If you use a black tube, you're not going to see anything. So this is 1/4 inch inside diameter tubing that I had to get it at the hardware store. The auto parts store didn't have it. Sometimes you can get fuel line, but this doesn't have to be fuel line. You can kind of use it once and then you're done. But you can set this up, cut it to wherever your length you need, have it sit in a little jar or something so you're collecting, because it'll be clean fluid coming out, just mixed with air, and then you can reuse that fluid if you need to. So again, not wasting anything. You can have this fluid drain into a little jar, and then once you're done, you're going to have to take the tube off. You'll get a little bit of stuff dripping off of there because of the way that it happens. But we'll go through that process next and show the bleeding of the brakes. Okay, here's my setup for the brake bleeding, and you're going to want to have a nice clean, kind of a glass jar is a perfect one. Make sure it's nice and clean because you'll reuse the hydraulic fluid goes in there. You see I have it setting on a box. I don't need to have it set all the way down on the floor. It's just more fluid for the hose to fill up. My little rubber top is there. And so what you'll do is you'll tell your person inside the car to push, and you'll loosen that, and then you'll close it, and then you tell them to release. So it goes something like, tell them press, you loosen the nut, and then you close it again after you feel that some air or some liquids come out. You'll close it, and then you tell them to release. You don't want to have them release while it's open, because then it can kind of suck air back in. One of the things to kind of avoid this is have this hose sit down in the bottom of the fluid, and if it is completely filled, then you'd be able to just suck up fluid again. But it doesn't normally happen that way. You'll see that as we're going back and forth doing this, you're starting to see fluid come out now, and you'll start seeing the bubbles. Again, this is the best thing for having clear tubing, because then as the bubbles dissipate, you'll open it and it won't look like anything's coming out because you're not seeing bubbles. So it's great to have this clear tubing so you can see bubbles when you open it. Here comes another one. You see the bubbles come out. So you'll keep going through this process until you don't get any bubbles. And what you'll have to do periodically is make sure that you're not running out of fluid in the master cylinder, because that's important too. You don't want to introduce air into this closed system. Right now, the master cylinder is closed and it's full of fluid, and it will allow the fluid to come down here through a metered process so that it's not pulling in air into the master cylinder. But you'll keep going through this process until you don't have bubbles. And you keep checking your master cylinder, make sure you have enough fluid in there. And once you're satisfied that you've gotten all the bubbles out, then you can be done with this side and then go to the back port. What will happen on the back port, you've already filled fluid up to this front port, so you'll have a lot less work to do on the back side. But you'll see that I'm basically going to stop here. I'm going to go check the master cylinder to see if it has enough fluid, and then I'll continue until it's basically running without bubbles. One or two tiny little bubbles isn't going to be a big deal, but you don't want it to continue to have lots of bubbles. And then you just repeat this process for the back side and then the other wheel, and then you'll be good to go, and your brakes will be ready to be operating. Okay, now here's final cleanup things. We've bled the brakes, but you're going to end up getting a little bit of hydraulic fluid on the calipers, hopefully just on the calipers and dripping down. As you pull this hose off, you're going to have a little bit that remains in the tube that's going to drip down underneath there by the bleeder valve. You can just take a rag and a screwdriver and you kind of move it around to get it. The more you leave on there, the more it's going to burn up and kind of smell. You don't want to get it on the rotor. You don't want to get it on the brakes. You have to use a brake clean to get that off. But if you just have it on the rotor or on the caliper here, you'll be able to just wipe it off. If you want to use brake clean, you can. And then again, we're done with this whole setup now. So I hadn't put the relief bracket back in place yet because I just wanted to make sure things were out of my way. And so now's the time to put that back in place. Check all your bolts to make sure that they're all tight, and then we'll be able to go to the next step and put the tire on. So once we're all locked up, next step, let's put the wheels on. All right, I have one thing I have to admit. When I was bleeding the brakes, I had this side not done. The caliper was just sitting there, and I heard a pop. Didn't think anything of it. But basically, one of these cylinders popped out, and I was leaking fluid every time my partner was pushing the brakes, and fluid was coming out. So I was very scared when I got to this side. Should put something in between the cylinders so it has something to hit against and it can't come out. There was fluid all over the ground. And my biggest scare was whether or not there was any fluid still left in the master cylinder. So I came up here, and lo and behold, there was at least some fluid in the master cylinder. So it wasn't a washout, because we had introduced more air. So once I got over that, so I probably lost 10 ounces of fluid, and need a little bit more to top this off, but it's at a safe level. Make sure you have, just leave a second caliper on the rotor, and it'll have something to squeeze against. So bottom line, project's done. I took the jack stands off. I had the jack from the car sitting there helping hold it up, because now I need to put this dust or mud guard back on. There were some snap bolts in it. So again, use your little fasteners and that sort of thing. But when you're putting your tires down, make sure you have it as tight as possible. Let the tires just touch down. Then use your breaker bar and set your lug nuts on your wheels. Again, do them all around, not one tight. Do them all and just keep going back in the star pattern and tighten them. And then once we put this dust shield on, we'll be good to go and go do a test drive.